Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the very first of what I hope will be many videos on this channel. Today, I have a top 15 list of some of the more powerful cards in Chronicle. Whether or not they're OP remains to be seen, but certainly, as you can see from this Ozan opening, there are some quite filthy things you can do in this game. A few weeks ago, when the beta first launched, killing your opponent on Chapter 1 was hilarious and also quite unlikely. But now a few deck lists have been figured out, it's beginning to become far more commonplace in the metagame. The first card on my list, therefore, absolutely is Torto Cash. Now, I gave him the top spot for a few different reasons, but let's start with what we just saw, the only 30 damage combo available in the game on Chapter 1. It starts with Skeleton Champion, who deals 5 to your rival. Yes, you take a lot of damage killing him without setup, but it's definitely worthwhile as he ramps you into a massive 6-1 weapon, perfect for 0 gold snapshots and killing humongous God Wars bosses. Yes, on Chapter 1. Next you kill Krill, who kills Torto Cash, who kills your opponent. Job's done. Now, admittedly, it's not just Torto Cash. You could make the argument that Krill is also equally as responsible for said combo. In fact, you could argue every card involved is equally responsible. But I gave Torto Cash the top spot in particular because he does seem to be the centerpiece of it all. I mean, it's not like people play Krill to kill any other demon at the moment, is it? Which is rather curious, actually, considering the ability to kill any demon would seem quite strong on its own. But you get a 5-2 weapon as well, which is not nearly as useful in any other circumstance as it is with Torto Cash. The two seem made for each other, with quite literally demonically strong synergy. So of course Krill isn't going to see play with other demons yet, because at the moment the power level it represents with Torto Cash goes above and beyond everything else demons have to offer. Torto Cash offers very potent burst damage to every single class to prematurely end games with. And I'd like to highlight that point. Torto Cash prematurely ends games. Sometimes you see him in decks that don't even try to do any damage to their rival. He's put in simply as an extra win condition that can sometimes randomly steal games out of nowhere. Because let's be honest, once you've killed a couple of KGP agents and paid for the odd monolith chamber, all your rival really has to do is let their health drop to about 20-ish and BAM! They're dead. Chuck in a strength potion on top of that, and quite literally, you're laughing with potential to sometimes deal more than 30 damage in a single card slot. So, clearly, it's quite easy to imagine Torto Cash being played in Ozan and Raptor, but as I alluded to earlier, even the girls play him as well. Admittedly, it's definitely harder with Ariane, who has her own health damage dealing agenda, but Linza, even without KGP agents, can quite happily Torto Cashify her opponents with quite minimal setup. I mean, for just 1 gold, Prototype into Torto Cash deals 20 damage. Chuck in a Ring of Recoil or Wilderness in there and do it all on Chapter 1, and that's a potential 24 damage opening with a class that's not even inherently aggressive. Whatever way you look at it, Torto Cash currently is a very easy way to deal a lot of damage quickly. And that really is all I have to say about him, and that's why he is my number 1. Yes, we're doing this top 15 in reverse order, I am sorry. Anyway, before we discuss the next card on this list, as part of this video, I'd also like to suggest potential changes each card could undergo. Please note, though, that all of the opinions and ideas expressed in this video were discussed with other high-level players in a community group chat on a public Discord server, so these ideas in this video weren't all just mine, but more of a community effort to ensure what I'm saying is actually popular opinion and not just me being biased. For more information on the public Discord server, which everyone is encouraged and welcome to join, check the description of this video. So, with all that said, here's a few fairly simple changes to Torto Cash that mostly leave it as it was before, just not so much of a problem. Firstly, adding Lose Weapon to the Torto Cash card text would make it not so inherently comboable with Krill, because, let's be honest, a creature with just 7 health that gives you basically a dragon longsword and kills any demon is probably strong enough on its own. And probably also limits future design space for Jagex if they wanted to make any other big demons in an expansion pack. Yeah. Losing a weapon after you kill Torto Cash, but before you strike with him seems fair. Or perhaps better yet, taking a durability hit of -1 or 2 might make Torto Cash more of the late game card that it was actually designed to be, by requiring at least some form of early game setup to be effective. That setup, of course, would be in the form of having to build base attack throughout the course of the game, or perhaps a big ol' Linza weapon that would survive the durability hit. Arguably, even with this change though, you'd still be able to sort of cheat out massive damage using buffs to temporary attack like I mentioned with Strength Potion and Prototype. But in my opinion though, that might be okay, providing that Tokash becomes a bit more punishing to utilise. Because at the moment, it's a fairly uninteractive card in the sense that if your opponent has it, there's really not anything you can do to stop it happening, outside of healing up out of range, which you can't always predict to do mid-chapter. Therefore, I might also change the wording of strike twice to read battle twice, or even battle once, strike once, something like that. And doing that would offer more ways for people to play around Tokash. You'd be able to do things like deliberately lower your opponent's health down to the point that if they did play Tokash, they'd also die due to the damage they might take from a battle, as opposed to just a strike. Alternatively, the stats could also be tweaked. I personally also wouldn't mind seeing Tokash with higher base stats, particularly attack, to achieve a similar effect to what I just mentioned. Of course, with all this said, it's still possible Jagex could go in a totally different direction if they felt that the Tokash burst damage wasn't healthy for the future of the game. Here's some food for thought. According to the Runescape Wikia, Tokash is a dungeoneering boss with a deep freeze special attack, which is similar to Ice Barrage. A cool idea could be something like freezing your opponent in place so they skip their entire next chapter. It could even be a symmetrical effect that happens to both legends, and I'm not saying that that would be a good idea or balanced in any way or that that's what I want. I'm just pointing out that really anything can be done at this stage in closed beta, and I support Jagex with whatever direction they take it in, as they have stated that they will be changing the card in some way fairly soon. Alright, coming in second, the next card on my list is Snapshot. Yeah, so the Ozan deck we saw at the start of the video, it also runs a few other massive Chapter 1 combos, which notably don't run Tokash. Innovated by the player Kishak, the deck also has in its destructive arsenal again Skeleton Champion for a 5 damage in a 6/1 weapon, but this time into double Snapshot for 14 damage, costing a whopping 0 gold, into Wilderness, dealing another 10 damage for a monstrous total of 29 on Chapter 1. And even if Ozan doesn't hit any combos like that, it's still Ozan and quite capable of finishing games in Chapter 2 or 3. If you'd like to see more of how ridiculous Ozan can be, look no further than Unforgiven's tournament games versus Sacred Souls, played for the Sapphire bracket of the Chronicle Community Cup, where he one-turn kills an opponent who didn't really make any dangerous or reckless plays, honestly. Admittedly, all this combo nonsense is fairly easily counterable. In the words of Wolf, it's like being Zerg rushed. So, providing you know what's going on, you can drop Chapter 1 weapon destruction and other greeting cards like Moena and Fern, which increase your rival's enemy's health. Doing these kind of things against somebody cheesing out these dumb combos will actually straight up win you games, as they'll die to the massive monsters they're playing, as either they won't have a weapon to fight them with, or you've increased those monsters' health. The problem is, though, that these hyper-aggressive Ozan decks at the highest level of play aren't as reliant on combos as you'd think. And most of the time, they don't hit them anyway. Certainly they're available, and you sometimes pick up dumb, cheesy wins, but these combos are by no means needed, and this is abundantly clear when you take a look at a player like Crazy Helm, who's very clearly had consistent results, as shown by his rank in Gold Ladder. He was the highest ranking player of last season and absolutely was maining with Ozan. Whilst on the topic of Crazy Helm, I think this is a good opportunity to mention that the Keris Silverlight deck that ended up on Reddit is not actually a good deck in any way at all, and was actually a troll post. The fact that people are actually playing that deck is actually very amusing to me. Anyway, back to the point I was trying to make. Snapshot, costing 0 gold, is absolutely bonkers. It allows for monstrous Chapter 1 openings, and allows for very, very potent, streamlined decks to exist, which don't waste deck slots on gold-generating cards like Hourly Morrisane, which don't deal any damage. So if you were wondering, the top-level, almost unanimous fix to Snapshot is that it should cost more than 0 gold. Maybe 1 gold, so that you can't open with Snapshots unless you slow down just a little bit to generate some gold, and at that actually have to run cards that generate gold in your deck in the first place, which would of course make Ozan decks overall less consistent at drawing damage, instead of always being able to top deck it 100% of the time, which is usually the reason you lose on Chapter 2, if you didn't already die on Chapter 1. As a side note, with said changes to Snapshot costing an extra gold, there would also need to be a consideration about buffing Lady Kelly, or not. And that is, by the way, the Ozan-specific diamond card that when you kill her gives you 2 snapshots. You'd either give her a +2 gold reward to compensate for the nerf, or you don't do that. And I personally am an advocate for not doing that, as she already provides godly consistency for early game lethals anyway, if you're able to find her as early as chapter 1 or 2. I mean, she's already giving you basically a dragon longsword and pseudo card draw in the form of Snapshot, which, considering the weapon, is probably better than ordinary draw. I really don't feel comfortable attaching gold generation to her as well, as it allows Ozan to skip that part of his early game if he opens with her. Just consider the power level of the two following openings. The first is Darren Lightfinger, which is a 0 gold cost support that makes your next support cost 4 less. He also rewards you with 1 gold, meaning you'll be able to afford the second card, which is a Dragon Longsword. Overall, these two cards are a net gain of 0 gold overall, as you spent it all on the 5/3 weapon. Now, compare that to this second opening, which is Save Spot into Lady Kelly, or Skeleton Champion into Lady Kelly, or Count Draenor, Giant Spider, Cave Slime, Kale, Sergeant Slimetoes, and many other cards into Lady Kelly. There's lots of ways to kill Lady Kelly. Yes, some of them mean you will take damage from her, but she gives you a 5/2 weapon, basically a Dragon Longsword. Maybe some gold, that's what we're debating here. Should she give you gold? Maybe, maybe not. Yes, if you use Save Spot, you do lose a card, whereas you wouldn't in the previous opening, but Lady Kelly gives you 2 Snapshots, which are probably among the best cards in your deck anyway. So that's a net gain of a 5/2 weapon, maybe some gold. You replace a card with a Snapshot and gain a Snapshot. And the Snapshots are still in your deck as well, as you didn't technically draw them. Alright, yes, there is the argument that Lady Kelly is a class-specific diamond card, so it's okay for her to represent a high power level, but even without a gold reward, opening with Kelly is still almost comparable to being strictly better by a long way than any other opening, considering the reach she gives you into the next few chapters as well. I personally don't think she needs gold. Alright, so there's that, and whilst we're on the topic of Ozan openings, I'd like to discuss some other cards which are also often found in Ozan decks, though I don't really want to give any of them a place on this list, as they're not actually objectively good cards outside the context of this specific deck. But I do think they need to be spoken about, and I think this video is a good place to do that. Alright, so I personally would also like to see changes to Dazing Shot, as well as all of the cards that let you battle or strike your rival for 0 gold, and those are Duel Tournament, Bounty Hunt, and Wilderness. I'd like to see these cards changed all in the same way, and I'd like to see their cost increased to 1 gold, but also give 1 extra gold as a reward for a net change of 0 overall gold to their cost/reward. This way they'd maintain the same power level on paper across the board, but wouldn't be as readily available on Chapter 1 without any early game gold draw. I should at this point out that partly the reason I think this is because Ozan has access to a number of different ways to get a weapon very quickly, and one of those is Scarabite Assassin, which has similar stats to Skeleton Champion and basically gives you a Dragon Longsword. There's a lot of ways for Ozan to get a Dragon Longsword, which makes those cards that let you either battle or strike your rival really quite potent. If I could only change one of those cards in this fashion, though, I think it would be Dazing Shot. Or Wilderness. I don't know. Dazing Shot can be so good against Raptor. And Wilderness, well, it makes perfect sense for that card to cost 1 gold, but also reward 1 gold. It costs gold to go PKing in the Wilderness in RuneScape, and obviously there's a lot of loot to be had there as well. It's not even a weird change thematically speaking, and that's true for Duel Tournament as well. Maybe not so true for Dazing Shot. But if you haven't already, go and watch Unforgiven's tournament games, which I mentioned earlier. A logical, well-placed Dazing Shot can achieve quite a lot for 0 gold, honestly. Anyway, overall, I think these changes, certainly to Snapshot, but to an extent Dazing Shot and the cards that let you strike and battle, are important for the future of the game. Imagine you're a new player named Total Biscuit, fresh out of practice mode, playing casual for the first time, and you run into this dumb Chapter 1 YOLOZan bullshit. Let's be real here, most new players don't have access to the rare cards which counter the combo nonsense, and most new players wouldn't think to play them in the right slots anyway. Most new players don't think to heal up until they've taken damage, which is a perfectly logical thing to think. And the earliest time that they'd be doing this versus an Ozan would be, of course, Chapter 2, and if they're going second, which happens 50% of the time, well, Ozan gets another slot to damage them in before they can react in any kind of way with a heal at all. And to exacerbate the problem, a lot of players are also completely okay with taking damage from their own monsters like White Wolf and Void Brawler on Chapter 1, and rightfully so, because those cards offer great efficiency at the expense of health, and part of becoming a good player is realizing that you can trade off your health on Chapter 1, as you have a lot of it, to gain potent effects from these super efficient cards. Except in a world where current Ozan exists, you just can't do that. Oh, and by the way, these new players mostly learn these skills in casual, where Ozan is absolutely going to exist. Why? Because it's the perfect place to grind chests. When playing with Ozan, a winner is usually resolved quite quickly, and the overall competition in casual is on average less difficult to win that 25% chance at rolling a golden chest off. I have to wonder how being farmed would affect the game's player attention, as I doubt it's particularly fun to repeatedly lose to such a fun and interactive deck over and over again. To conclude, the main points I'm making is that Snapshot ought to cost 1 gold, and maybe there's a few other cards that could be looked at, because even without Snapshot or Torto Cash, the following are still quite disgusting Chapter 1 combos available in the game right now. Consider Skeleton Champion, again for 5 damage and a 6/1 weapon, into another Skeleton Champion. The second one you won't take any damage killing because you already had the weapon from the previous Skeleton Champion, but you still do another 5 and get another 6/1 weapon, which is really quite good with the Wilderness. 10 damage there, and a second Wilderness for 4 damage as you no longer have a weapon. That's 25 damage without Snapshot or Torto Cash. You could also use Skeleton Champion, again 5 damage, 6/1 weapon, which you can kill a Scarabite Assassin for that effectively pseudo not quite so good Dragon Longsword, into double Wilderness, 9 each for 24 damage. Both of these openings, again, I repeat, do not run Snapshot. Next up on the list, Skeleton Champion, and at this point it probably looks like this video is out just to bash Ozan. It's not, I promise, so let's make it abundantly clear right now that if changes to the cards mentioned previously were to be made, then Skeleton Champion is absolutely fine the way it is. 5 damage and a 6/1 weapon is still pretty big, but probably fine. Actually, the main reason I mention this card is not because I think it's the 3rd strongest card in the game, I don't think that, but more because it's the quintessential starter piece of all the combos we've been discussing, and that's true for a number of other combos in the game, which haven't been mentioned yet, that I think are worth pointing out in a discussion video such as this one. Consider this: Skeleton Champion for 5 damage to your rival and that 6/1 weapon, which makes it fairly easy to kill Captain Roven, and he gives you 3 gold and makes your next support cost nothing. And our next support happens to be the most expensive support in the game, Death Touch Darts. That now costs nothing, it gives us a 6/2 weapon and kills our next creature, which happens to be Torto Cash, and that weapon also happens to be quite useful with strike times 2. Overall, this is a 25 damage combo. Obviously, if changes to Torto Cash were made, similar to as described, then this combo wouldn't really be a thing. But I do think it's worth pointing out a number of the different combos that are ran in that deck that make it so consistent, and that Death Touch Darts can be used in these combos and decks as well as effectively another Krill. I personally also think Captain Roven has the potential to be monstrously overpowered as well. If not now, then certainly in the future, because it reminds me a bit of the old Troll Shaman, which had 5 health and granted a 2 gold reward in addition to what it already does. That card was changed to the Troll Shaman we know and love today because it was already providing an insane amount of ramp into a free Earth Blast and didn't really need a gold reward on top of that. It was also apparently limiting design space for cool new expensive Ariane spells in the future. Similarly, Roven seems like it's also going to limit design space for cool new expensive supports in the future as well. And to sort of prove my point, consider the following Chapter 1 combo that's currently available in the game now, in theory. Alright, so this one you probably haven't seen, and it'll be a while before we do see it, but Captain Roven, again, makes our next support cost nothing, into Death, the neutral 9 gold support that is available to every class, which removes half your opponent's health. And presumably on slot 2, they probably still have full health, so that's 15 damage, into Skeleton Champion, who deals 5 and grants you that 6/1 weapon. Of course, you'll take 16 damage killing him, and you took 12 probably from killing Captain Roven, so at this point you're on 2 life as well. But then into Wilderness for 10 damage, and yes, this card says battle, but you'll strike them first, and they'll hopefully die, and since they're dead, they won't strike you back, so you'll actually win. And that's a 30 damage combo, the second 30 damage combo available in the game. Of course, this one's not very feasible, and you shouldn't really count it. But yes, admittedly, death is a diamond, and because of that, you can only run one copy in your deck, meaning this combo would be super unlikely, and death probably isn't very useful in any other time other than Chapter 1, or maybe they've healed to full, maybe it's useful then. I'm not sure, we'll have to start playing with death before we can really make an assessment of it. But Roven into death is always going to be a 15 damage combo, costing 12 health, and you'll always have 3 gold after doing it. I'm saying this now because I think it's worth being aware of this effect existing, and being used in tandem with other expensive, powerful cards that don't exist yet, but could be released in expansion packs in the future, and we don't know what those cards might say. Which leads nicely onto the discussion of whether Roven should give any gold as a reward, or perhaps a little less. In my opinion, 3 gold is just a bit too much, Ramp. I mean, I get the idea, it's thematic, it's so that you can afford any support you want, even if they Brugson you, it makes sense for that card. But the problem is, even in a world where Snapshot costs 1, Roven makes the following openings possible. Captain Roven, into a free Sir Adamant Goldsword and the 3 gold reward you get, into gold that funds Snapshot or Wilderness. I don't know, the fact that you can even get a Goldsword on Chapter 1 and still have any gold left over is nuts. You then Snapshot twice with your remaining 2 slots, or you don't, you could use any number of the many cards that let you strike and battle instead. You deal about 16 damage, and then you stroll into Chapter 2 with both durability and gold left over. Captain Roven is a seriously strong opening card that grants you both an expensive late game support, but also enough gold to cast a few Ozan-esque supports to finish the game out with. It doesn't even hurt that much to kill Roven using up only 12 health, 4 of which is healed back by the Sir Adamant Goldsword. Similarly to my discussion on Lady Kelly, Roven provides a way to spend health to circumnavigate the need to generate gold in the early game. I'm okay with the card text, it's a cool design actually, that lets you spend health aggressively off as a resource, but the fact that it gives you 3 gold as well, it's a lot of ramp considering the card is not particularly punishing to kill, and facilitates some fairly bonkers openings going into Chapter 2. Coming in next on my list is Fishing Trawler. Yes, any card with the potential to restore 29 life points in a single card slot for just 4 gold was probably going to end up on this list. Obviously, the card isn't as good as a static heal for 29 effective life, because yes, that's not what this is, and the effect it does have is symmetrical, meaning you'll also be healing your opponent, and yes, this card is conditional in the sense that you first actually have to get your health dangerously low enough before you can utilize it effectively. And for these reasons, there is therefore an argument that Fishing Trawler as a design is not actually overpowered, but considering the types of decks it usually finds its way into, where the full heal effect is exploited to the absolute max, popular opinion on the public Discord server is that Fishing Trawler is one of the best cards in the game currently. I mean, it's not actually that difficult to manipulate your health total. It's easily doable when you put cards like White Wolf and Ogre Brute in your deck. You purposefully play these efficient cards that spend a lot of health as a penalty, so you're lowering your life pool faster than your rival is, and then when you Fishing Trawler, the health gain is way more beneficial to you than it is to them, as you've probably lost a lot more life than they have. Also, it's not even that dangerous to lower your health if you know what to expect from your rival's deck, because, well, let's say you're at 15 life vs Ariane, it's, I don't know, Chapter 3, you're going first, you think to yourself, the maximum amount of damage she can possibly do in 2 slots is 12, and that would be using 2 Wind Surges. Presumably neither of these Wind Surges have been played in this hypothetical game so far. So, you know what the worst case scenario is, and if you play around that, if you assess what this worst case scenario is every single time, you shouldn't die. In this hypothetical match, it would be safe to put Trawler in slot 3, where if she did lower your health by 12, you'd have 3 life remaining, and then you'd Trawler for 27 effective health gain, and now you see how strong this card can be, especially when you compare it to Full Tetsu, which costs 1 extra gold, and grants only 14 effective life gain. 7 of which is armor, and honestly, 7 armor up against Ariane is actually not that useful at all, since a lot of her cards deal direct health damage to bypass it entirely. Now, to exploit Fishing Trawler to the absolute maximum, you need to put it in a deck that doesn't care about its rival's life total at all. And these kind of decks generally either try to win the game in the final fight, where they'll have significantly higher attack stats. Decks like that, for example, are Corporeal Beast Raptor, which generally just buffs its attack all game long and keeps its health and armor high by killing various creatures. Another deck similar to that is Tanked Linzer, which instead of buffing its own attack, does still do that, but tries to also lower its opponent's attack, and sometimes slams a weapon down in the final slot before the remaining fight. Other decks that use Fishing Trawler to the absolute maximum try to win the game, sometimes in a single turn, with a combo that represents 30 or more damage. Decks that do that, for example, are basically every Torto Cash deck, and the weapon stacking Pulverized Linzer deck, where you get a weapon, you build it up really big with lots of the various cards that Linzer has for doing that, you try and get your weapon to about 15 damage-ish, and then you pulverize for 30 or more damage. I personally quite like these kind of decks the most, as they suit my playstyle more and feel quite satisfying for me to play. They're built quite well around Trawler, and that's what Trawler is. It's a card you build a deck around, and those kind of cards are very important for card games, as it can spark off an idea for a deck in a player's mind, and that really is what makes card games fun. The issue is, though, that it's also currently seeing play in a broader range of decks as well, which don't necessarily try to achieve either of the things I just described. And this is due to the current popularity of Ozan and Ariane in the metagame. When fighting against those legends, no matter what your deck is, your win condition is usually not losing, which Fishing Trawler helps you quite effectively at doing, as explained. Overall, Trawler feels cheesy and annoying to play against compared to Static Health Game, which feels a lot fairer. Going away from Chronicle feeling annoyed is probably not going to make you want to spend money on the product very much, so I personally don't think the card is healthy for the future of the game. It consistently puts players in a spot where they're working out their turn, telling themselves, well, if they don't have Trawler, I win, if they do, I lose. And this game ought to be more about planning and game expertise than about luck and RNG. I know, at the moment, it feels like Fishing Trawler needs to exist. I so am aware of that feeling of sweet fishy justice you get when you heal up for like 25 or more against an annoying hyper-aggressive face smork bullshit deck, but that style of play is probably quite likely to go away, at least a little bit, sometime in the future. Regardless, let's discuss how this card could be changed. Firstly, it's worth noting that Jagex has openly stated that they'd like to entirely redesign Trawler from scratch, and an interesting potential change thought up by Wolf on the forums is that instead of an immediate heal, perhaps Trawler should instead add cards to your hand that heal you. In Runescape, I believe the Fishing Trawler minigame grants you an absolute ton of fish, I think. Therefore, it would actually make sense thematically, right, for Trawler to add something like 3 fish to your hand that heal you. You could, as his suggestion goes, get a swordfish that heals you for 5, a shark that heals you for 8, and a monkfish that heals you for 12. And all of these, of course, would cost 0 gold or something like that, and obviously the values can be tweaked. I think it's a cool idea, and it's not actually as strong as it sounds, because the heal isn't instant anymore, making it more into something that you sort of cash on in later in the game. And that offers a lot less flexibility. You also have to hold these cards, which is sort of janky and effectively reduces your hand size. And finally, you have to find a time to play all these cards out over the course of an entire chapter. And you only have a limited number of slots to play cards in this game, so that's going to slow you down quite a bit. Something not on the forums that I personally would also like to see with that suggestion is the effect being symmetrical, so your opponent gets fish as well. I like the idea of maintaining Fishing Trawler as a fairly cheap 4-cost card that you can build a deck around, rather than being just a super neutral heal generator for all legends. Again, like I said earlier, I think it's important for a game like Chronicle to have those kind of cards that you build a deck around, as it inspires that sense of, oh, I can make a deck that does this, and I don't know, for me that's what makes card games fun, and I think it's important that this game has that. Against aggressive decks, you wouldn't really care about the fact that you're giving them fish to heal, for the same reasons Fishing Trawler is already used now. Well, actually, come to think of it, you might be quite happy to give them fish, as it would block their hand with 3 useless cards. Maybe your rival shouldn't get 3 fish then. Maybe 1 or 2 fish would be fine if they get the stronger ones. Maybe. Yeah, either way, the point is, it's an interesting card, right? And I really hope Jagex at least considers maintaining the symmetrical nature of the card. Up next, coming in, what now, 5th is it? We do have, put your hands together for our first diamond card. It's Kale. Kale. He is a diamond, and because of that, it is only possible to run one copy of it in your deck, which is fair enough, because most diamonds offer utility effects that, from a design point of view, probably wouldn't be balanced to run more than one of. Diamonds, though, if you go and look at them, the majority of them offer very weird, very specific effects, which, yes, are strong, but are only strong when you build a deck around them. Kale is in a weird spot, along with only a few other diamonds, where you don't really need to build a deck around him at all. He's just objectively a very, very strong card. And I don't like that. Each diamond ought to be the cornerstone of a specific deck you made, not an auto-include in every single one, which you just happen to put in because you're lucky enough to have pulled it out of a pack. Kale, in the majority of decks that he's actually run in fact probably every deck he's being ran in, it is being used as a strictly better version of Sergeant Slimetoes. Let me tell you a story to put this in perspective. I personally was lucky enough to get beta access on day 2 of Chronicle, and one of the first cards I crafted with the few gems I had was Sergeant Slimetoes. When killing him, you take a net total of 2 damage overall, but that's very much worthwhile as you get a 3/2 weapon out of him, bringing your attack up to 5, which is extremely useful for killing 2 different 5-ish health creatures, like a Haunted Soul and a Customs Officer, which I was using at the time as I'd pulled it out of a pack, or a White Wolf and, I don't know, anything else with 5-ish health that you might want to kill. Except, you could also use the 2 durability to kill 1 10-ish health creature. For example, Infernal Mage, Sergeant Grimspike, Jorga Shaman, those kind of things. And when I opened Kale out of a pack, I was ecstatic, as it was basically the one diamond card I really wanted if I could have had one of them. And I got it. It was effectively another Sergeant Slimetoes in the deck, and it's a strictly better version, as you take a net total of 0 damage killing it. It's also less susceptible to grief due to having less health, and it straight up gives you a bigger weapon as well, which actually does matter if your rival does stuff like decreasing your base attack to 1, or increasing the health of your creatures, or whatever. And to this day, it still lets you one-hit Troll Shaman, which you can no longer do with the Sergeant Slimetoes weapon, since Troll Shaman's health was nerfed from 5 to the 6 that it is today. In Linza, Kale is an almost strictly better version of Geeka for those weapon spend effects she likes to utilize. Why take a 1/2 weapon when you could have a 4/2 weapon, which just has more flexibility, as it can also be used to kill monsters? And it has the same durability as Geeka. I do think this card needs rebalancing, and popular opinion is that the Kale weapon ought to be a 3/2. And then it would probably be fine, though still strictly better than Slimetoes, as you still take 0 damage killing it. Alright, admittedly, Kale doesn't give you any armor, so he's not quite as good as Slimetoes if you can kill Slimetoes in a single hit, but realistically, how often is that going to happen? Slimetoes has 6 health. Maybe Kale's stats should be changed. He's holding a 4-attack weapon, why doesn't he have 4 attack? Instead of that, you could make him a 2/3. Then he'd be on par with Slimetoes, as you'd take 2 damage killing him if you only had 2 base attack. You could even leave the weapon as a 4/2, and make it so that Kale is a 4/3 creature, which would make him way more punishing to fight, unless you take precautions, like buffing your attack in some way. But then again, he's not really a particularly challenging adversary from the RuneScape tutorial, so it wouldn't really make sense to buff his stats. Maybe leave him as a 2/2, but instead of immediately granting you a weapon, instead he could add a 4/2 weapon to your hand, which you have to play later on. I don't know, the point is, at the moment, he's a very potent card to open the game with, and I think strong early openings are something that should be minimized where possible. Coming in at number 7, my second favorite card in the game, actually, we do have Fern. Now, before we start this one, I just want to mention that I do think this card is very good, but at the highest level of play, where people know to play around it, where they know it's a thing, and they take it into account when planning their turns, I don't think it's OP. Though it probably does require more testing, because let's be honest, it's a Ruby and not many people are going to have it yet, let alone 2 copies. As it turns out, increasing your opponent's next enemy's health by 4 can be quite strong, especially if you know where to put it. This card usually doesn't perform that well in slot 1, as you'll often hit something small like a KGP agent, but in the later slots you can get a lot more mileage out of it, where you might expect to find a Void Brawler, after they've, say, buffed their attack by 1 to be able to kill it, or a Jad if you see they're approaching 7 attack, or a Jorga Shaman from Ariane, which often gets played at the end of a turn to allow players to draw cards during the turn so that the Jorga will hit harder. Other good predicts are where Linza might put her spend effects, as if you increase, I don't know, a Dust Devil or a Fremennik Crafter's health, maybe Linza will use up all the weapon durability fighting the monster, so that there's no weapon left to actually spend when she's killed it, and then the spend effect wouldn't resolve. The thing is, though, if you do aim for these later slots, you could end up missing all their enemies entirely, and Fern could end up doing nothing. So, Fern, you really have to have a good read on your opponents, and Fern doesn't have a gold reward, so you do have to have a good read on your opponents. Because if it doesn't hit anything, and you're a damage-dealing deck, you're going to slow yourself down quite a lot. So, why is this card my second favourite in the game? Well, because, for me, as I've already alluded to, it encapsulates good play, as it rewards players with better reads more often than it rewards players who aren't quite so on the ball. Overall, I think this card at the moment is fine as it is. I'm sure Jagex will be keeping an eye on it in the future as the beta unfolds, and I guess we'll have to see what happens. Coming in at number 8, another diamond card, Moena. Moena is a curious card, actually. It suffers a similar problem to Kale in the sense that it's an objectively very, very good card that fits basically every deck. Moena is actually a card I own, and the reason I didn't place it as highly in this list as Kale is because I don't put Moena in every single deck I build, but I do with Kale. Moena, as well as Fern, don't really fit the theme of a fishing trawler deck, which I like to play, as those cards are more about sneaking and damage, and with Trawler I generally just don't care about what my rival's life total is. So Moena ends up not making the cut in those decks, despite the fact that it is a very good card. Moena, at least in my opinion, does seem to be an objectively better version of another card, and that card is Scorpion. Yes, it deals 1 less damage, but I'd trade 1 damage any day for the chance at hitting one of my enemy's big creatures with 3 extra health. I guess at this point we ought to draw a comparison to Fern, as they do have similar effects. Why didn't I place Moena more highly than Fern? Well, it's simple really. Both me and Crazy Helm think increasing an enemy's health by 4 is so much more valuable than 3. Increasing something's health by 4 in the early game, such as a Void Brawler or a Krasian Warrior, means they might have to hit it 3 times to kill it, assuming they have 3 attack, but increasing it by just 3 health means they'd only have to hit it 2 times. And there's a lot of other creatures that this sort of applies to as well. Admittedly though, Moena is a lot easier and safer to kill than Fern, and does deal 2 guaranteed damage. The two are actually very, very similar in power level, and some days I wake up thinking Moena is better, and other days I wake up thinking Fern is better. I don't know, today I guess I thought Fern was better, and Moena comes just after it, but worth pointing out these are 2 quite similar cards. Next up, ladies and gents, a card that I don't want to spend too long talking about, as I do intend to make a separate video discussing it, and just tech cards more generally, and that card is Corporeal Beast. You know, I'm conflicted as to whether or not this should have even been on the list at all, because there are a number of super hard counters that exist, and that's really going to be the premise of the video that I mentioned that I'm going to make. Either way, this card does have the potential to give you 30 armor, and you can run 2 of them in your deck. That cannot be ignored. That's 60 armor. And this video so far has been based more on a card's potential more than anything else, so I suppose it ought to make the list really, and that's why I'm including it. The player named Unforgiven at the moment is definitely the player with the most experience piloting Corp Beast Raptor, though according to him, it is easy to counter, really easy to counter, with cards like Green Dragon, Raging Calphite, Fire Surge, and a few others that interact with armor. It's definitely a good card. I'm not quite sure why it gives you so much gold either, but there's that. Alright, next up, coming in at number 9, a staple in Linza, Repurpose. Repurpose, gain 10 armor, lose your weapon. Yeah. In the current metagame, it doesn't feel overpowered when you use this because Ozan is popular and currently very strong. Ozan, though, is unlikely to remain as highly represented in the future as it is now, and in reality, gaining 10 effective life in a single card slot is disgustingly efficient considering the relatively small requirement of spend any weapon. Compare Repurpose to something like Full Tetsu, which gains 14 effective life for 5 gold. which is definitely a significantly steeper requirement to fulfill than spending a weapon. However, Repurpose isn't an inherently efficient card like Tetsu is, though. It does require some degree of skill to be used optimally, otherwise it's decisively average. Equipping a weapon, for example Geeka, or something like Geeka, into Repurpose is 2 whole cards, granting you 10 effective life, which is 5 for each card. It's also conditional life gain, meaning that you have to actually have the weapon ready and equipped before you can cast Repurpose. Compare this to Adamant Armor, which costs 1 gold and gains effectively the same, 5 effective life, which, for the sake of argument, is exactly the same. Admittedly, Adamant Armor does cost 1 gold, but that's a fairly common drop from most fight cards, and it's arguably a less steep requirement to fulfill than spending a weapon. In fact, I definitely think it is. Adamant Armor can also be utilised in a single slot, whereas Repurpose requires a turn of setup, as you first have to equip the weapon, which makes it inherently less flexible. So, why is Repurpose considered so strong then? The potency of Repurpose largely comes from spending 1/1 weapons, or close to that, where the durability has either already been spent on fighting monsters, or it's a 1/1 weapon that came from an already efficient card like Calphite Worker or South Sea Pillager. Spending a whole fresh weapon like the 1/4 you get from Ice Warrior is just not something Linza decks can usually afford to do, as there will be lots of other cards in their deck that also require spend weapon. And there are only a finite number of weapons to spend in your deck, which you also have to draw on time. Sometimes you have a handful of spend weapon effects, but no weapons to spend, and it's not a good time. Repurpose, therefore, is only strong when used optimally. Certainly it could do with toning down though, as it does seem to be an auto-include in every Linza deck that doesn't have a giant weapon building agenda. And an interesting change that tones the card down in power level but maintains some flexibility as a high health gainer could be rewording the card text to something like this. Spend weapon, gain armor equal to your weapon's attack plus its durability. So if you had a 1/4 weapon, you'd gain 5 armor, 1 from its attack and 4 from its durability. This, however, is clearly not particularly strong at all, so perhaps it ought to also grant 3-ish base armor as a reward, in addition to the spend effect as well. I like this change because it rewards players for spending big fresh weapons, such as the 1/4 that you'd get from an Ice Warrior or the 1/3 you'd get from a Goblin Raider. Usually you'd rather keep those kind of weapons to utilise other spend effects with, for example Dust Devil or Fremennik Crafter, which usually require weapons with more than 1 durability to spend, as you'll often use up some fighting the monster. This change though, even with 3 extra armor, still seems rather weak compared to the current Repurpose though, so I don't think this would be a good fix. But the point I'm trying to highlight is that a player should be rewarded for spending a larger weapon they'd rather not spend, right? It also makes sense thematically. I mean, if you were a blacksmith, surely a bigger weapon would provide more resources to make more armor out of, right? Perhaps a better way to achieve a rebalanced Repurpose would be to reword the card text in a different way, say something more like this. Spend weapon, gain armor equal to that weapon's attack multiplied by its durability. In the current metagame, this might work. It would certainly also have cool synergy with cards like Living Rock Brawler, which is a fairly small creature that grants your weapon plus 1/1. The card worded like this also fits the Combo Wombo Linza style, where she builds a giant weapon, as it then gives her the flexibility to turn that giant weapon into lots of armor in some matchups. I think it's super interesting, and would make for very cool design. The only concern I have at the moment though is that I haven't yet thought of how this could potentially be abused, or even how much armor gain is potentially viable. Actually, something that does immediately spring to mind, though, is that for 6 gold, I think you could equip a Chaotic Longsword into Artisan's Workshop, into Repurpose for 6 times 5, which is 30 armor, so actually this probably isn't balanced either. Yeah, the first one's not too good, and this one's probably a bit too good. Irrespective of balance, though, the point I'm making is that Repurpose could work in a way that scales to your weapon size, as opposed to being just static armor gain. I am, however, completely okay with static armor gain, and supportive of whatever Jagex decides to do, since, Repurpose is a basic card. It needs to kind of be simple for new players. They don't need to deal with complicated effects until they unlock a few more cards, right? And Mod Merchant has hinted that this card could be receiving changes. These are just some interesting ideas I had. Overall, I do think Repurpose is a strong card, and it could do with toning down a bit, but I only think it's strong with weapons that have mostly already been spent. Alright, coming in next at number 10, the Cabbage Man. Melzar the Mad. Now, this is a fun card. It's very satisfying to fill your rival's hand with tainted cabbages, which, for those of you who don't know, are zero-cost support cards that read, lose 1 health. At the highest level of play, the reason this card is effective is because top players like to maintain large hand sizes, so they'll always have more options available to them. After all, the game is about building 4-card combos, right, so this would make sense. And the maximum hand size in this game is 10 cards, so most players will usually leave at least 3 empty spaces in their hand, so that at the start of the next chapter they will be able to accept the 3 cards that you draw for free. Melzar, though, fills those slots, which they're leaving deliberately empty, with useless cabbages and blocks them from drawing those cards. That's the best outcome, blocking 3 card draw, which is effectively like them sort of discarding 3 cards, not really, but eh. Even if that doesn't happen, though, even if they still have the space in their hand to draw the cards that they get for free at the start of the chapter, you still effectively reduce their maximum hand size from 10 to 7 as the cabbages are taking up space, and that does make it really awkward for them to draw more cards for the rest of the game, as they're bound to draw into some unplayable bricks like Krill that only gets played when the combo with Torto Cash becomes available. The best thing is, if they want to get rid of those cabbages, they have to waste an entire chapter laying them down on the board. So Melzar, definitely a weird card, because it's hard to measure the effectiveness of it, as you don't really know what your opponent is experiencing. But having experienced the Cabbage Man myself, and judging from the reports my friends on the Discord server give me, I think Melzar does a good job, even if you can't see any tangible benefits. Though, I gotta say, the very best thing about this card is opening with 2 of them on Chapter 1 and blocking all of their card draw for that chapter, and if there is a time you'll notice the effects of Melzar, it will be after that on their Chapter 2 of 4 straight cabbages. On the topic of card draw, next, coming in at number 11, are actually several different cards I'm grouping together in the same discussion. This is because they all have one thing in common, and that is that what they do should be something every single deck in the game has access to in some way or another. These cards are White Wolf, Krasian Warrior, Fremennik Crafter, Skeletal Peon, Guest Donation, and basically every other card that draws at least 2 cards. The theme is card draw, as I mentioned. Since there are so many of them, though, I'm only going to talk about the first 2, White Wolf and Krasian Warrior, which are probably among the most widely played cards in the game, simply because they're very efficient cards, and they're neutrals, meaning every class has access to them. White Wolf is a free card. You start the game with it the moment you first sign into your account, and it definitely deserves its spot among the best cards in the game. Why is this? Well, let's compare it to 2 different cards, shall we? The first I'd like to compare White Wolf to is Ali Morrisane, which for the record is also considered a very good card. Ali gives you 3 gold, and White Wolf comes pretty close, giving you 2 gold. Let's also compare White Wolf to the Ariane-specific card Skeletal Peon. They both draw 2 cards, but White Wolf draws you 2 additional gold as well. And that's what makes this card so good. It's very, very efficient, as it's both a great way to generate gold and draw cards in the same spot. And both of those things are usually exactly what you want to be doing on Chapter 1. Because of the card's efficiency, yes, you do have to pay a penalty, as if you kill it with only 2 attack, you'll end up taking 5 damage. But on Chapter 1 you should have plenty of health, and you should be able to trade some off as a resource. Krasian Warrior also has a similar power level to White Wolf, in the sense that it generates gold and draws cards. Except it's not nearly as easy to kill on Chapter 1, where you really want to be playing it the most. You really do need to gain at least 1 attack before taking this on, because you don't want to take 7 damage fighting it. Gaining 1 extra attack isn't that difficult though, and once you've gotten it, unlike White Wolf, you don't take any damage killing Krasian Warrior, providing everything goes according to plan. As discussed, Fern is a card and you should be wary of it. So there's that. Would I change any of these cards, since they see play in basically every deck? The answer is no, I wouldn't, though I do think it's worth mentioning a really, really excellent game mechanics suggestion put forward by Flammenchem on the forums. He said that some monsters could be labelled as aggressive on their card text, and aggressive monsters would strike you first before you strike them, just like in real RuneScape. I absolutely love this idea, as it would be a great way to balance future cards as well as possibly some of the current cards. If I was in charge at Jagex, I'd absolutely put this in the game, because it fits so well with the RuneScape theme, and the reason I bring this up now, rather than anywhere else, is because I'd like to change White Wolf to be aggressive instead of you taking 2 damage when it dies. I think that change would make the card text a lot cleaner, and it would basically still be the same card, as you'd still take roughly the same amount of damage trying to kill it. And for those of you who have actually walked over White Wolf Mountain in RuneScape, you'll absolutely know how perfect aggressive as a label would be for White Wolf, since they are aggressive little bastards, aren't they? To conclude, I just love this suggestion, and I think White Wolf would be a great card to put it on to introduce new players to this mechanic with. Especially since the card is one everyone has access to from the moment they start playing the game. Coming in at number 12, we do have Yoga Shaman, or Yoga Shaman, I think it's actually pronounced. I really don't know. There's a J, it says Ogre, it's spelt like that. This card is insane, or it can be. Even if they only have 3 cards in their hand, it does 6 damage. And 6 damage is about average when you compare it to other cards with similar stats. If they have more than 3 cards in their hand, which is very likely, it gets even stronger, and sometimes it'll just win games on its own. I mean, it's capable of potentially dealing 20 damage, which, yes, is unlikely, but sometimes it'll happen, especially if you're running Melzar the Mad in your deck as well. Those two are a pretty funny combo, and actually are both independently good cards as well. That's all I have to say about Yoga Shaman. He is a guy. Alright, coming in at number 13... Major Mary Rancor. There's not much to say about this one, actually. A lot of people encouraged me to put it higher up on my list, but I don't know. It's definitely a good card. 1 gold to fully destroy any enemy weapon as you replace their weapon with a crappy 1/1 that they probably don't want. It's a good card, and it's also quite flexible, as it's also a way for Linza to gain a weapon herself, which is important for her spend effects like Repurpose. The reason I didn't put it higher up on the list, though, is because most of the time, 1 gold to do either of those things is quite expensive, considering Tool Belt and Calphite Worker are also cards that exist. It's still very strong, though, because it does do both of those things in the same slot, and, that's flexibility, which a lot of other cards don't have. And it's notably also the hard counter to the massive Linza weapons some decks try to build, so that's definitely something to its merit. Just those kind of decks are not that common. At top level play, Weapon Stack Linza is a horrible deck due to the popularity of weapon removal on ladder. I know I play that deck, and I don't know. I guess this card could cost 2 as it's ran in almost every competitive Linza deck, but I really do think more testing is needed before we jump to any conclusions. Number 14. Another diamond card. We do have Rollo the Stout. This card in theory is absolutely bonkers in almost every deck you put him in, except hyper-aggressive ones, I guess. It's just not quite as good as Kale, and it's a diamond, so people aren't going to craft it, even if they do have the gems for it, because they'll probably want to make Kale first. And that's why I think it's not being seen very much on ladder, and that's why it isn't higher up the list. But I do think this is a problem child, or it will be, because what it does is nuts. Firstly, compare it to Geeka. You get the same weapon! And anyone can kill this, it has 2 health. You also get 3 armor. And draw a card? What the fuck? It's kind of like Adamant Armor, Mischievous Imp, and Geeka all in the same card slot. Admittedly, it's not quite as good as some of those cards, and those cards weren't considered particularly good to begin with, but when you put all of those effects into one guy, it's like 3 cards worth of value. 3 bad cards, but still 3 cards. I guess the counter-argument to this being good is that it's not particularly focused in the sense that it doesn't really do any one thing well, but I personally don't think that's a very good argument because this card does do a lot of stuff. So, where would you play it? You'd play this for the extra attack it grants. That's always useful if you need to kill something like Krasian Warrior, or Void Brawler, or whatever it is you want to kill. Maybe you're playing around griefing cards as well, like Fern, and just want the extra attack to be safe. Or maybe you're a Linza and you want to spend the weapon, whatever. It does that. It's a nice unconditional filler card you can just slam down on the board, and you can't go wrong with it because it grants 3 armor and it draws a card. It cycles itself. Basically, I think this card is so good, largely because it provides such crazy early ramp on Chapter 1. Often, a weapon like Geeka is really useful there, as it's kind of like KGP Agent for a short while, or it gives you that same effect without discarding a card, but it also has Draw a Card written on it! That's something you really do want to do on Chapter 1 as well. I think this card needs 1 extra health, so that it is at least a little more punishing to play early on and, requires some form of setup if you want to get the full value of that 3 armor he gives out of it. Because if you only had 2 attack, you'd basically not gain the armor, but if you'd taken the time to gain a little bit of attack, you'd get the armor. We'll have to wait and see, though, since very few people are playing with this card. It might not need changes, but that's my 2 cents on it, and we'll see what happens. Alright, the final card on this list, ladies and gentlemen, is probably not one you were expecting, and also one that I'm not actually sure is good or not, because I've only ever seen it played once, so it's another diamond card, as you probably guessed, and coming in at number 15, it is Yelps. But before we talk about it, though, I would like to say that all of the diamonds that I've discussed in this video are the only diamonds which I think are a bit too strong, largely because they don't need to have a deck built around them. They're just absurdly strong cards. And I think that that's true for Yelps as well, though we won't know until it starts to get played a bit more. And the reason it's not being played very much right now, I think, is for the same reason as Rolo the Stout. We're still quite early on in beta after all, and not everyone has access to that many cards. So the reason I think Yelps is strong is simply because it's the only card in the game with such low stats that has the potential to give you 8 gold. 8 gold! That's so much considering how easy this card is to kill. I honestly think that this is sleeper OP. 8 gold is a lot, and you can do a lot with it. And it's not that hard to put Yelps in a deck either, as it's really quite easy to manipulate your gold pile. If you go over 8 gold and Yelps won't work, all you have to do is spend some. Of course, we won't know how good Yelps is until people start reporting their experience with it, but yeah, keep an eye out on this. I think that this card is the next thing we'll all be complaining about. The only reason it's not higher up the list is because I've only ever seen it played once. Alright, ladies and gents, that is my list of the top 15 cards in Chronicle 2015. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. This did take me several days to put together, so do express your opinion with one of the 2 buttons below. I appreciate all feedback. And before I go, one massive shout out to everybody working on Chronicle at Jagex. What a tremendous group of individuals who are all so passionate about this game. You guys really are an asset to the company, so keep on doing what you're doing. Thanks for listening again, everyone. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more from me, and I'll see you all again next time.